Hello, hello. Okay, we're live.
Okay, let's do this.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. How's everybody doing? Good? Good?
All right.
Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. My name is Jesus Guzman. My pronouns are he, him, él, and I'm an associate with PolicyLink in the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. And I'll share a little bit about PolicyLink and the Alliance in just a minute. But
all right, what's going on, folks? All right, so my name is David Turner, pronouns he, him, his. I'm the manager of the Brothers, Sons, Selves Coalition. We're a coalition of 9 community-based organizations in Los Angeles, and we're proud partners with the Alliance of Boys and Men of Color.
So I want to share a little bit about PolicyLink and the Alliance. Brothers, Sons, Selves, as David just mentioned, has been a longtime partner and member of the Alliance. So first, PolicyLink, we're a research and advocacy institute headquartered in Oakland, California. Any Californians in the house today? Yes? Okay.
West Coast.
So we're based in Oakland, and PolicyLink has a variety of teams and initiatives across the country, again, working on racial equity, economic equity, by lifting up what works. And one of the teams at PolicyLink is the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. And the Alliance has been around for about 8 years. Most of our work, and we got started in California, really in response to what we felt was a crisis happening with young men of color when it came to things like gun violence, violence in community. And so when we came to the work, we're focused on looking at what are the root causes and systematic barriers that were creating the conditions in which many of these issues that were limiting the opportunities of boys and men of color were happening. So we really brought what was a political and systems change approach to the work. And we knew that in order to make any systems change happen, that meant being in partnership and building power with other community-based organizations like Brothers, Sons, Selves in LA. And so that's a little bit about the work that PolicyLink and the Alliance does. And one of the issues that we want to talk to you about today has to do with school reform, school discipline reform in California. And so one of the specific policies that we're going to lift up today is something called Willful Defiance. Has anybody heard of Willful Defiance before as a suspension? Some folks have. Front row seats too, I love it. We might need to bring you on stage to join us, but I want to turn to David, and I want to ask David if you can talk to us a little bit about what Willful Defiance looks like in action in the classroom with the young folks that we work with.
All right, all right. So I see a couple of folks in this audience right now with their cell phones out. All right, that's a suspendable offense in California. You see the hat I'm wearing? This is also, or was also, a suspendable offense, right? So willful defiance is this really broad catch-all term, right, where young people can be suspended for anything if they're willfully defying authority, right? So if you have a cell phone, I'm sure some of you probably have kids, and you give your kids cell phones so that way you can contact them in case of an emergency, right? If you happen to text your kid, hey, I'm gonna leave the door this way, when you get home, make sure to look for it, right? If the teacher sees that, they can be suspended for it, right? For example, one of my young people in Long Beach that I work with, he was suspended for breaking up a fight. How do you get suspended for breaking up a fight? Again, willful defiance was this really broad term, right, where young people were being suspended for no reason. Pass it back over to AZ.
Yeah, thank you, David. And so a couple of things that we want to underscore about really why this was such a large problem and why that broad, subjective, catch-all term was so problematic is that there's, for a variety of reasons, young people are getting pushed out of school. And we have to stop and think about what the broader picture and context here is, which is that when we talk about kids being pushed out of school, they're often being pushed into something else, right? So when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, this is often the triggering event that's happening, where it starts with a suspension in school, lost days of instruction, and that cascading, ensuing set of events often ends up with an increased likelihood of being arrested, of ending up involved with the juvenile justice system, dropping out of high school, and ultimately adult incarceration. So when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, that pipeline has a starting point. That starting point is suspensions, as David just outlined. It can be incredibly subjective, have a broad catch-all term, but is also disproportionately impacting, when we're looking at the numbers in California, disproportionately impacting students of color, Black and Latino boys, youth with disabilities. There was a whole group of folks, vulnerable groups that were being disproportionately impacted. So we're going to get into what some of those numbers look like. So here's an example. This is a pretty typical county in California, San Joaquin. Not typical in some other respects, but at least with suspensions and expulsions, we're looking at the rate at which all types of suspensions by race, ethnicity, gender, and grade level. Black and Latino boys, again, suspended at higher rates, students with disabilities. And when we started this work about 10 years ago, in terms of when we were hearing from young folks about this happening in the classroom, this was around 2011, 2012, we had roughly about 600,000 suspensions happening in California. Right, so I want that number to sort of sink in for a moment, of 600,000 suspensions happening in which kids are being pushed out of school, right? Lost days of instruction. And about 18% of those suspensions were for a serious offense. And so when we think about when somebody's getting suspended, it's usually for something like there was some serious offense of, there was a fight, there was some sort of violence or something that we would deem, that's why that kid got suspended, right? When 18% of those 600,000 suspensions are for serious offense, well, what else are students being suspended for? This is what David's talking about, right? It was about 43%, the largest group of students being suspended had to do with willful defiance, right? And so when we started this work, I want to give a couple of examples. In the state's top 8 highest suspending schools, Black and Latino students made up 80% of those suspended for willful defiance. 80%, right? In the schools suspending the most students, Black and Latino students were making up 80% of those suspensions. And again, like I mentioned earlier, suspensions, as a single suspension can double the odds of a student dropping out of high school. And so all of these, a single suspension can have pretty significant consequences downstream. So I want to turn to David, and David's going to talk to us a little bit about how we ended up using data and some of the talking points we just shared with you, some of the data points in terms of how we move the stories of these students being impacted in classrooms into the state capitol, into school district boards, and trying to make that change so that we could win some protections for students.
All right, thank you so much. So, again, right, as we're talking about these issues, right, these, we have to remember, right, that data isn't just all raw data. These are real people, right? These are real people who are being pushed out of school, real people who are losing the opportunities to learn, and real people who are losing the opportunities, right, to advance themselves through education. Right, so I want to bring back the student who was suspended for breaking up a fight, right? This was in Long Beach, California, right? Long Beach, it was one of the top 30 school districts in all of California, right, for willful defiance school suspensions. And it's one of the top 5 in LA County. So one of the things that we did and how we were able to use data as a tool for change was we took the data from the California Department of Education and we created this fact sheet that you see up here behind you, right? So there was one school, right, where 100% of all of the students for 4 years who were suspended for willful defiance were students of color. 100%, right? In this particular school district, black students were 6 times as likely to be suspended for willful defiance, right? So what does all this mean? Why does this matter? Hit the clicker. So we're able to take this information, right, and then use this information to then advocate, right? So what we do is we take information like this, we train our organizers, right, on how to express this information, on how to weave this type of data into the stories that they tell about what's happening on the ground. And then with those things combined, not only with the data and the information, but also their personal stories of how they've been impacted by these issues, we're able to help advance and move policy in the state of California. Right, so with that, right, that's some of the critical ways that we were able to take this information and then turn it into systems change. Keep going.
Cool.
So, what happened because of this? What was won, right? So the first bill, right, that was passed was Assembly Bill 420. Assembly Bill 420 ended willful defiance school suspensions for grades K through 3. And that was passed in 2014. Next slide. After that, right, one of the things that was really happened, right, was suspensions dropped 48% in the first year. 48% in the first year after the bill passed. So again, right, like we see that these things are having a real life impact on what's happening in schools. Now again, if you're suspending a first grader for some of these issues, maybe there's some deeper problems, right, with classroom management that we have to address, right? But again, right, like these are some of the issues. And this year, a couple of months ago, as a matter of fact, we passed Senate Bill 419. Senate Bill 419 expanded this ban for grades K through 8. So now we can protect young people from kindergarten through 8th grade from these type of school suspensions. Right, we'll definitely be working on ensuring that we can expand this to grades 9 through 12, right? Because again, high school students are disproportionately impacted by this particular type of school suspension. But right, we've been able to over the last decade actually, right, to move California and help change some of their ideas about this type of school suspension.
And then, so thank you, David, for that. We've won a couple of victories in California, as David just outlined, 2 different bills, 2014, just this fall, a few months ago, and those were significant advancements in making sure that we won protections for students to make sure that we were keeping kids in school at a very bare minimum, right? That kids aren't being pushed out and being pushed out into what we refer to as the school to prison pipeline. And we also know at the same time that as we've won these victories and winning protections, that there's still some ways to go, that high school is still an area that we're continuing to make that push, that even though expulsions are no longer an option, that suspensions in high school are still often used. And so that's an area in which we're going to continue to advocate and push to make sure that, as you saw and as we've been sharing with all of you, that there is something that there is a very serious inequity when we look at the rates of enrollment for many of these students, and we hear the stories from folks, and we know that disproportionality is something that we want to continue to drive home as far as the inequitable treatment and the lack of opportunity that's being granted to students in California. So that's a little bit about the work that we're doing in California. I want to invite folks actually also 2 invitations. Mark Philpart, also a colleague of ours at PolicyLink, he'll be doing a presentation tomorrow on college athletes in California. Some folks have seen the news around college athletes and earning compensation in the NCAA. That's a bill we worked on as well, so I invite you to join us tomorrow for that and how we use data. We'll also be at diversity inclusion booth, so feel free to hop on over and chat with us some more afterwards. We also have some website information, social media. Feel free to check out some of the stuff that we do there. And again, thank you everybody for coming out and joining us this afternoon.